Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Sebastian. Hi, everybody. Jim Orlando here. I'm calling in from Toronto, and I'm talking today about 5 new arcade pet games that I wrote, generally speaking, since the beginning of COVID. And, you know, I started a little bit before. This really had nothing to do with COVID. It just so happened that COVID struck and lockdown struck, and time that I would probably generally normally have used to be commuting to work, I was able to spend writing these games. So thank you for the opportunity to share what they're all about and walk through what we have here. First thing is 5 new games. The games I've written for the PET are all in PETSCII, obviously. If I suspect, generally speaking, everybody here is familiar with PETSCII, and specifically on the PET itself, there's no ability to do bit mapping or color or anything like that. So the real constraint on the system is, 40 characters wide, 25 lines, and a certain number of characters that you can use for your graphics. No sprites, of course, etc. So it really was about writing this in the original PET with original PETSCII graphics. The 5 games that I've written are all arcade style and have kind of dated a little bit, starting around the time, a little bit later than the PET, with Defender, which was about 1981, and then a couple of games. One game that was most popular on the Apple II, which was Lode Runner, and Zombies, which was probably Lemmings, which was more kind of the era, a little bit later, in sort of Commodore platforms, a little bit later than that. And then 2 Flash games. So by the, this sort of Flash era of games, both Portal and Tower Defense. And I'll kind of walk through what each one of these is and kind of how it worked on the PET and how I was able to adapt things either successfully or frankly unsuccessfully, but it is what it is. So these are the 5 games I'll be talking about today. First question, why do this? What kind of caused me? And I mentioned that just before COVID lockdown, which was early 2020, is when I kind of got started. And what really kind of kicked this off was I read an obituary about Chuck Peddle, who was the lead architect of the 6502, the processor, and he was the original designer of the Commodore PET, or led the team that designed the Commodore PET. And the 6502, I think, as we all know, had a real history in the 8-bit era. It was the CPU that was used in the PET. Later in the VIC-20, Commodore 64 was used in the Apple II, many of the early Atari platforms, as well as the original Nintendo. So that processor itself was really, the CPU of the 8-bit era. And having read about kind of the history of Chuck Peddle and really thinking through 6502, I kind of thought, well, Commodore PET was my first computer. And I thought, I'm just going to revisit this. And so that's what I ended up doing. And what was always on my mind back then was, if you think about the history, the PET itself came out in sort of 78, 79 timeframe. By the time many of the new cool sort of games came out into the arcades, Commodore had essentially moved on to the VIC-20 and then soon thereafter the 64. So you had a whole kind of raft of very cool 8-bit games that didn't exist on the Commodore PET. So in my mind, my favorite game was Williams Defender. It was an arcade game. You're probably familiar with it, but I just put a picture here just in case someone wasn't familiar with it. It itself was pretty leading edge in the arcades at the time. It was a side-scrolling space shooter, so you kind of flew around on that planet at the bottom. And there were many moving parts on this, many moving kind of items. There was the ship itself, which you controlled. There's little aliens, and there's all kinds of different aliens. There was people on the planet that the aliens would pick up, and basically you had to shoot the aliens and save the planet or save the people from the planet. The hardware of the machine itself was based around 6809, running 2 megahertz, so a little bit more powerful than the 6502. And it had a 6800 CPU as well for all of the sound, and was full bitmap graphics, 16 colors, 320 by 256 pixels. So it was quite a leading edge hardware platform and a very, very good game, frankly. You know, a lot of action, a lot of things going on. And it was my favorite arcade game. But of course, there was no version of this game for the PET, because by the time Defender came out, C64 was here. So there was a version of it for the Commodore 64. There was a couple of versions of Apple II that I'm aware of. There was one on the Atari 2600, but never one on the PET. And so my goal or thinking was, well, could I write this game for the Commodore PET? And that's exactly what I set out to do. So first thing you have to do when you look at this PETSCII graphics and what's available, you have to look at what is the graphics that you're trying to do in the arcade. And what I kind of showed here is, the blocky kind of PETSCII graphics that I use to mimic what you see in the arcade. In the main kind of viewer here are the bigger graphics. The little man is just an arrow. The alien kind of looks a little bit like that, best I could do. And when the alien picks up a man, of course, the man is embedded in the alien, and that's what you get here. The other problem you have in this game is that there's a scanner at the top of the screen, and you need to represent all of these characters on the scanner as well. So it gives you a full planet view. And so you need smaller versions of all of these here. And, you can sort of, if you squint a little bit, and maybe if you've had some vodka or scotch, you can kind of see, well, yeah, the pi symbol looks a little bit like an alien. And an A, capital letter A, looks a little bit like that. Yeah, so that's what I ended up going with. So the main thing here, and I'm hoping this video comes through properly, but I'll just sort of play the video, and then I'm going to talk a bit about how I did what I did. It's going to be a little bit blocky. There's no sound, so don't expect to hear the sound. There is sound in the game, but I didn't try to record it on this. This is the opening menu of how to play the game. So here we go. You see in the scanner at the top, the aliens are appearing. You can fly around, shoot multiple lasers on the game. So there's you can sort of keep hitting the laser button and it'll keep firing them. It's not limited to just one, so there's a little bit of trickery there. The different things that are happening at the same time are really oriented around the graphics of the capability. So I know there's a chat message, and I can't read it now without destroying my thing, but if the graphics are bad, I can't fix that right now. We'll just play this out. Hopefully it's not too bad, and then we'll, I'm going to talk and show some of the graphics with just pictures. So this just lasts another minute. There's a bit of an effect there when the ship appears, the dots sort of converge in, and when it explodes, it's the opposite effect. And that's a little bit like in the real Defender game as well on the arcade, where there are quite exciting explosions when things happen, of things blowing up. Okay. So I'll just end it there. Oh, and there's just a bit of an effect here. Let me see how to advance this. Okay. Now, some things I want to point out in the actual game itself. When I first released this on the Commodore, Commodore PET user group in Facebook, somebody emailed and said, how did you get the scanner to work in real time as you're moving the planet? And some of the graphics here, just to give you a sense, I think we're all aware you kind of have 40 characters wide and 25 lines. Everything kind of works in a power of 2. So the entire planet that you're scrolling through is 256 characters. In order to shrink that into the scanner at the top, I use 32 characters, which is obviously, both are multiples of 2, so you can do some very quick divisions that if this little alien is located at, a certain sector of like row 200, all you have to do is divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, and boom, you can figure out how to put it into the scanner. So powers of 2. In the height itself is 5, and the planet in the main window is 20 high. So again, divide by 4. If this thing is located, at row 10, you can just quickly divide by 2, figure out where to place the little character right here. So that was sort of trick number 1, is try to make everything powers of 2 between the main planet and the scanner. The other thing that I've done here that may not be obvious, the alien torpedo is a little square block. And if you're familiar with the PETSCII squares, that actually doubles your density. You get 4 little squares in one cell. So you have to do some extra calculations on which block to draw, but it gives you a lot more flexibility on what's going on. So I took advantage of that to get a little bit more density for these bullets. There's parallax stars. Stars are little periods. And parallax is that as you move on the planet, the stars go more slowly. It kind of gives the fooling you that there's some depth there. And then finally, for the rocket itself on the ship, what I do is turn a little block on at the back of the ship very quickly, every 60 times a second. And it looks like it's a great effect, so that when you're accelerating, it looks like there's a little rocket on the back of the ship. So those are just a few tricks that I used to get the game working. In the end, I was pretty happy with it. It is a playable game of Defender. You can kill the aliens, pick up the little man, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got carried away. Now picture this, we're in the thick of COVID. And I said, wow, that was kind of cool. I'm going to see what else I can do on this PET. And in the 6502, one of my favorite games on the Flash era was called Desktop Tower Defense. Not that well known a game, but essentially what you do is put these little towers down, and aliens kind of walk through, and you have to shoot the aliens by placing the towers. So in a sense, you're creating a maze. In the PET, the capability to do this is really built around putting down these towers, which is all the things with the ones. And the aliens are just basically single characters, in this case, the little circles. But very cool little game, to try and just sort of build things up. Requires a lot of action. Behind the scenes, what's going on in the programming is that every time you put down one of the towers, there's a new maze that has to be recalculated. So for example, if you put a block in the middle of the maze has to be recalculated, and the aliens try and figure out a different route to get to the exit on the right-hand side. There's an algorithm called Dijkstra's algorithm, which I had to implement in 6502 that works very quickly. It works in a fraction of a 1/60th of a second in a sense, but works out quite well. The bullets themselves that the towers fire are little periods, and they estimate the location of where the enemy is going to be when it hits it. And then there are also torpedoes that get fired that kind of track it as it goes. So there's 2 types of bullets or torpedoes in this game. The next game, you're probably familiar with Lode Runner from the Apple II days. There was obviously versions in VIC-20, 64, originating on the Apple. There never was one on the PET because, as I say, by the time the new cool games came out on the Apple II and in arcades, people had moved on to the VIC-20 and to the C64. So I implemented Lode Runner on the PET using PETSCII graphics. Some of the tricks here that I'm pretty proud of, if you want to I'm going to show where you can download these games, but there's an iris effect, basically a circle that opens up and closes when the level opens and closes, or when it starts and begins. So it's an iris effect that I wrote into the language. Quite hard to do, when you only have addition and subtraction in a 6502, and really what you're doing here is sines and cosines and squaring things and taking square roots, etc. But managed to get that to work quite effectively. The other thing I wanted to point out that I thought was pretty cool is that for the little characters, for the little men, both the enemies and the man you control, they sort of use the half block characters in the PETSCII character set. So you can see on the right-hand side here that the very first character, when the person's at the far left of a cell, there's one block, and in very next block, they use the apostrophe in it. And then there's a, an ability here to kind of use his back, which is really the square below it. And then as you move forward, it just kind of keeps going from there. So you can sort of see how you can get an animated effect of a person walking and moving their arm with really just sort of rudimentary graphics here. It was kind of cool. I hadn't seen any games that use that effect on the PET before. Next game is PETSCII Lemmings. Probably familiar with the Lemmings game. By this time we're into the 16-bit era. And there was a very, very comprehensive game, Lemmings, coming out of Scotland, actually. In the PET, there was nothing like it. There were versions eventually written for C64, but you can sort of see how I used the same little characters from Lode Runner that I showed a moment ago to sort of show how you can get these little lemmings going back and forth and walking on platforms and things like that. And if things work properly, I'll show another video of that. And then the final game I wrote is called Portal 2D. Portal 2D came out on Flash, and it itself was sort of a clone of a game called Portal, which was written for Xbox. So we're well into the 64-bit era of the original. It was a 3D game called Portal. Some people took that concept and wrote Portal in Flash. And I took that concept and wrote what I call PETSCII Portal 2D, which of course uses the PETSCII graphics. But what you sort of see here is there's a little man that kind of runs around and he flies through space. When he hits a trampoline, he flies. It kind of uses some pretty cool effects with gravity on how you actually control the man and what the environment is, again, which I kind of hadn't seen really on a PET game before. So it worked out quite well. I'm going to try and play one more video here of all these last 4 games. The first one I showed was Defender, of course. This is just a quick snippet of all the 4 so you can see it in action. Hopefully this comes through. So this first one is Desktop Tower Defense. You can see the aliens have escaped my maze and are heading for the exit on the right-hand side. But in the meantime, all of these turrets are shooting all of the other ones as they're in the maze. We're now on to Lode Runner. Here comes the iris effect that I talked about. It kind of opens and closes in a circle. And you can see the little PETSCII man at the bottom kind of running around using the graphics that I talked about. So it kind of gives you the effect of a double density capability that isn't normally usable in the game. He picks up gold and he runs around and basically picks up all the gold. And then once you have all the gold, you're able to grab, get out of an exit. Okay, this guy exits, and this is the end. So the iris effect on the way out. This is Lemmings. With Lemmings, by this time, when it came out on Amiga, you of course had a mouse, which you don't have on a PET. So you're controlling that cursor with just the arrow keys going up, down, left, right. And then when a lemming comes to your letter, you can hit enter essentially, and it will sort of program that lemming to do what you want. In this case, all of these lemmings have been programmed to halt, which makes the lemmings turn around. Now that all the lemmings are out, you have to basically blow them all up. And that essentially ends the level. And then this is the last game. This is Portal 2D. I picked a level here where you could sort of see a little bit of the gravity effects. So this man is jumping on a trampoline. You create 2 portals. He goes through one portal. Now he's going through and going up. And you can sort of see that as he hits the apex, he kind of slows down and gravity kind of takes effect. Now what he needs to do is get over to the exit on the right-hand side, and he kind of catapults that way. So that's the Portal game. Oops, yeah. So this is my last slide. If you have a pad or if you run Vice Simulator, you can go to my itch website or whatever you call it. You can download all the games there. there's an online emulator that has been set up by Norbert Lensteiner out of Germany at his website, masswork.at. And he's been kind enough to host my games in there so you can play it online in an emulator. I've written an iPhone pet simulator or emulator, and you can just type in the words PETSCII game collection if you have an iPhone, and the games will come up. You can play it on a little Commodore PET emulator on an iPhone. And then as I was doing this, Cornel Kolma out of Hungary, out of Budapest, emailed me and said, "Hey, I want to port your PETSCII games to both C+ and C64." And he did in fact do that. So you kind of have the +4 versions here, and these are the locations you can download that if those are your systems of choice. Anyway, that's my 15 minutes. Sorry, Sebastian, I went about 20 here, but hopefully that's okay.
That's perfectly okay. No, that's fine. Thanks a lot. For this, maybe yeah, we are not that strict on the timing.
Okay, good.
I see no questions in the chat. I see nice comments. People saying, "Look amazingly retro" on Facebook. People say this is really great stuff. Here I see, what do I see here? Thank you. Nice version, looks nice. Indeed, it looks really nice. I don't know if there are any questions. I had maybe a couple, because now I see that you did everything in PETSCII, but I'm not familiar with the version 4, the basic version 4. Is there no sprite for the, or was it a choice from your end to not to use sprites?
No, basic version 4, you know, there was just an evolution of the PET. There are no sprites on it at all. It's only, there's no bitmap, no bit mapping graphics. Okay. You only get the black and white, or in this case, green and black, and only little characters that you can put on into any one of, you know, 40 by 25. So it's all done, you know, manipulating, in a sense, little alphabet letters on each character. Yeah. No sprites whatsoever. Everything's written right down at the base level at 6502.
And is it written in assembly, or is it in basic?
Yes. Yeah, all assembly. Everything is 100% assembly.
And so you showed your website. There we can download the game. Is for, if people are interested, are you sharing the code as well?
If anyone wants it, sure. I don't. It's not up on GitHub or anything, but if anybody wants it, absolutely, they can have it. It's not. I'm not a professional coder, so you get what I send. If somebody wants it, of course. If somebody wants to try it, you know, it's only on the iPhone. It's not on Android. But the easiest way to play these games is just to download the iPhone version with the PET emulator, because it's all built in there. But certainly, you know, if anybody wants to try look at the code or whatever, they can just email me.
Good. Good to know. Perfect. I see something else coming. GitHub is a nice place to put public sources.
Yeah, totally agree.
Is someone trying to ask a question? I don't know. I hear some. It looks more like a background noise. I don't see more questions. If someone has question, maybe they can still put it on the chat, and maybe if you stay a bit around, Jim, then you can reply from them. Thanks a lot. Really
nice. Okay, thank you for having me, Sebastian. It's great to have been here.
You're more than welcome. I will stop recording now.